We're here today, we're out in the woods, and we're talking about how to stay warm, how to start a fire. Nicholas Cresswell and so many of these other guys that are in the wilderness, they have to stay warm, they have to build a fire. I've got Dan Wowak with me today. He does wilderness skills instruction, and we're gonna be talking about fire. So tell me about fire, how to make it, what they would have had.
Well, their preferred method of starting fire would have been flint and steel. That's the technology they would have used. But before you even get to that, it's very important that you know the triangle of fire. So the triangle of fire is heat, oxygen, and fuel. If you have all three elements, you'll have fire. If you lose any one of them elements, you don't have fire. So it really is broken down that easily. Now, fire is much more complicated because there's a lot of factors that go into it, but it always boils back down to that triangle of fire. So even when we used our flint and steel set, it's all about that triangle of fire.
Right.
So let's look at a flint and steel set here. So flint and steel technology it's quite simple actually. It's a hardened piece of metal and a piece of flint. And when you strike this, it's going to create a spark. So when I strike my striker off my piece of flint, we're creating spark. Now what a lot of people don't realize is that how this actually works is we have a hardened piece of steel, but we have a harder rock. So this rock is removing metal from our striker every hit. So when it removes that metal, it's combusting in the air, and that's giving us our low temperature spark. So with this alone, we can't have a fire. These sparks aren't just gonna just light a piece of wood on fire.
We could try it and it wouldn't burn.
It's not gonna do anything. So we need a medium to create an ember. And that's where either charred material of what's around us or natural char, or some type of charred cloth. And that's what we're gonna start with first, is charred cloth.
Okay.
So let's look at first the technique of actually how we're gonna ignite this char cloth. We want to think about our piece of flint as a razor blade. And that razor blade is removing metal from our striker. So at a 45-degree angle upward is going to be most ideal. And when you hit this with your piece of metal, you want to think about removing that material. So imagine you're using this razor blade to slice that off. So you don't need a lot of pressure, and it's more of a slicing motion than it is a hitting motion. So we're just slicing downward, and the majority of those sparks are rolling over the top. So at that point, we would take something like our charred cloth, and we place that on top of our flint that's at a 45-degree angle, and then what we can do is begin to strike this.
Oh, and you caught right there.
Give it a little bit of oxygen, and we have a lit piece of char cloth.
So we have heat, we have, you know, we've got oxygen, but we need some fuel, really, right?
So we have an ember there, and now we need some fuel. So that's where a bird's nest or a tinder bundle come into play. So let's look at actually how we build that, and then we'll reignite a piece of this and blow it to flame.
Okay.
There's a multitude of different ways we can make bird's nests. So starting with just tree bark, we can look at inner bark from tulip poplar, inner bark from basswood, even bark from a cedar tree, or what I collected here earlier is some birch. So all of that will work really well. And it's always great to team different things up together. So not only the inner bark, but you can take something like some of this dried grass that we found down near the pond, and then something like this cattail, which fluffs up really well. It doesn't ignite too well, but it's a very good ember carrier, so it will extend our ember. So adding all of this into a bird's nest is really well. Once we place our ember inside and we add oxygen to that triangle of fire, we now have heat from the ember, fuel from our bird's nest, and we add the oxygen, and we should, at that point, have flame.
Right. So let's make a bird's nest.
Okay. One thing that is very important is when you create a bird's nest, you don't want to make it that it looks like a bird was sitting in it. You want more depth this way, front to back, rather than really big. So you can see I have some thickness there. So when that ember starts to burn in, it has somewhere to burn into.
Right.
So let me grab a little bit of this cattail, and I'll put this in here just as a extender, just like that. Now, if you can give me some char cloth. One thing that's always important with char cloth too is you can always make more. We can always make more out in the field. So if you ever think that the material is a little subpar, just grab a little bit more cloth.
Okay.
And we know it's been a little wet out here, so we can take a little bit extra, and then we can always make some after the fact. So I'm actually going to let you hold this while I ignite the char cloth. Same technique that we just looked at a second earlier. We're going to keep that piece of flint at a 45-degree angle, put our piece of char right on top of it, and get this ignited. Always put your fire-making device away.
There you go.
And now I'm going to place that right in the middle of that bird's nest, and I'm going to begin to give it some oxygen. Now as that burns and grows larger, I can start to close that in because we want to trap that heat in more and give it more fuel around itself. As soon as we have flame, we never want to blow on open flame. And then of course turn it on itself like this, because that's giving it more fuel, and we know heat rises. So we would take this and place it inside our fire lay.
Right.
And then once that's inside our fire lay, we want to think about how are we going to do this again. So that's where we're going to start to make more charred material. Now to make our charred material, what we want to do is first get some type of tin. So this is just a plain tin container. We're going to actually place this in the fire once we put our material in it. Now, if the tin doesn't have any type of vent, we need to vent it somehow.
Right.
If it seems like it has a hinge or anything like that, it normally has enough airflow out of it that it's going to be fine.
Okay.
So we just open up our tin and we can place our material into it. Now material, we have a bunch of different options. Any type of natural cotton material will work just fine. We also collected some punkwood while we were out there. So punkwood is just that spongy wood that's starting to rot, but it's not totally rotted yet. We can just place that inside. Cattail works fine. Also any kind of pithy plant material that's dry will work good. We're going to place this in the fire and allow it to start to cook. You might see some flame and some smoke coming out of there. That is just the material we place inside becoming carbon at that point. So it's really important we just keep it in there long enough. You can't overcook char, but you can undercook it. 10 minutes will probably be enough for what we have here, and then we'll test it out. Now our char material is off the fire for a good amount of time. We really want that to get to just room temperature in a sense, because if we open that up ahead of time, we introduce oxygen in that triangle fire, it will ignite into an ember. And it'll burn up. And so we don't want that to happen. So we have to let this cool. A good rule of thumb is if you can handle it and hold it, it's fine. So we open that up and we look, everything has been charred from our punkwood to our cloth, and we are ready then to make our next fire.
And if it doesn't get all burned up properly,
then you can just put it back in the fire and just char it a little bit more. So it's not rocket science, it's just very simple. So if it looks brown or there's any color left in the material, put it back in and let it cook a little bit more.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier, if we lost our flint and steel, if we don't have it, what are our other options? I've got a flintlock here.
So flintlock is flint and steel technology.
Right.
So we can use the char cloth right in place of where the powder would be. Of course, you want to make sure that your gun's not loaded.
Right.
But we could just take a swatch of this, place it right down there in the pan.
Yep. We close it.
And then
we can just
go ahead and set it off, and it should ignite the char cloth.
There you go. It's all ignited, and we can just take that right out and put it into our bird's nest.
Yep, and that would be it. So, I mean, it's a very simple process, and there's multiple ways to do it.
Right, and we don't have to have an extra piece of equipment.
Nope.
We can just do it right there.
Nope.
I want to thank Dan for bringing all this great information about fire. It's one of the most important parts about surviving in the woods, in these outdoor environments. We have to stay warm, we have to cook. So this is really the important stuff. We got to know how to do this. Thank you, Dan, for bringing all this great information. If you're interested in learning more about surviving in the woods, in the wilderness, and all those kinds of things, you'll definitely want to check out Dan's YouTube channel and his wilderness school. Tell us just a few seconds about that.
Yeah, the Appalachian Bushman School. We're located in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Pennsylvania. You can check us out at coalcrackerbushcraft.com for all our classes and everything in between.
We'll make sure to put a link down in the description section. And if you're looking for fire starting materials, you need a flint and steel, because you do, make sure to check out the link we'll have to our website with all sorts of fire starting equipment. Thanks for joining us today.